Hello BookTube, and welcome to my weekly reading vlog. Not a lot of reading got done this week, unfortunately, so I just have a couple books to talk about and not even very much in those, but we'll see what we can make of this. First one is The Story of King Arthur and His Knights by Howard Pyle. And then the grammar book, an ESL-EFRL Teacher's Guide by Marianne, Celce-Murcia, and Diane, Larsen-Freeman. I'm not going to talk this week about the Linguistic Wars, which I have been talking about for the last several weeks, but I'm finished with this book now. I finished writing my written review. I filmed my video review and posted it on this channel on Monday of last week, so go check that out if you haven't already, or don't if you're not interested in linguistics. I did not read any pages of this book this week. The previous week I had reread the first 14 chapters while writing my written review, but this week I didn't read or reread any of this book, so I'm just saying that I'm now done with this book. And then, now that I'm done with that book, I've decided to come back to the grammar book. Now, the grammar book, I started last year in July, so almost a year ago now exactly. And I had started that off, well, for a couple reasons. One reason is, as an English teacher, it's always my ambition to try and learn as much grammar as I can. I've not been entirely diligent about this over my 20-some years of English teaching, but I have read a few grammar books, and I think there's more that I can learn, so this looked like a very good one. The other reason I picked it up at the time was I was really having a hard time with Chomsky's Universal Grammar, and I talked about this in the started video I did a year ago. And I was thinking that this book might help me with Chomsky's Universal Grammar by helping me to beef up my basics on grammar. That was probably a stupid idea for a couple of reasons. One is that the level of abstraction in Chomsky's Universal Grammar is so high that something like this for an ESL-EFL teacher is not really going to help me that much. Although, actually, that being said, I take it back. It helped me a little bit. There were some Chomskyan sentence trees in here, plus the idea of this is going to get a little bit abstract, but the idea of how the prefix hops on a continuous verb helped me to make sense of some of the stuff that was going on in the Linguistic Wars. So, you know, it's not a, this isn't for the linguist, and yet there is some bread and butter stuff in here that did actually help me out with some of these more abstract grammar books. But yeah, the big problem is I just have very limited reading time these days. Last summer when I was reading both of these books at the same time, I had a lot of free time at work, but that since dried up. So, you know, between having the toddler at home and between being very busy at work, I just did not have time to read two grammar books at once. So I finished off this one, and then I finished off this one, and now I'm finally going to return to this one. I apologize for those of you who had been wanting me to talk more about this book. There was some level of interest when I first made the started video last year. A couple people have been asking in comments of various videos when I'm going to talk about this book. So apologies for that, but I guess I'm going to start talking about it now. So before I ended up before I stopped reading this book last year, I made it, I don't remember exactly where, up to page 180 something, I think. I think it was right at the beginning of chapter 10, negation, or thereabouts. But since then, I've lost my bookmark. And the reason being, actually, the toddler in my house pulled the bookmark out of the book. She likes doing that. And so I got home from work one day, and the bookmark was pulled out of the book, and I said to my wife, how could you let this happen? Who was watching her? And my wife said, they don't have time for this. And the thing was that the book wasn't even at ground level. The book was up on the shelves. So she had climbed up to the table to get to the shelves, to pull the bookmark out. I thought it was safe up on those shelves, but little did I know. I've decided that I should probably just restart again from the beginning anyways. Partly because I don't remember exactly what page I was on. I know I definitely covered the first 8 or 9 of these chapters. But partly because I think enough time has passed that I should just start again and read this again. It strikes me that maybe part of the reason I read so few books every year is because I spend so much of my reading time just going back and trying to review stuff I've already read, because I'm such a slow reader, or because I get distracted by other books and then come back to stuff a year later. But I'd like to give this more of my full attention. I regret to say that this book has somewhat deteriorated in my care the past year. For several months, I was carrying around in my backpack with me everywhere I went. And then rainy season came in Vietnam. And I had at least one night where I was absolutely drenched. Could not get a taxi, had to walk like halfway home, and I live all the way across the city from where I was working at the time. And I had one of those heavy-duty like backpacks that was supposedly proof against rainy weather, but it was just really, and I had an umbrella and everything as well. But it was just really coming down that night. And when I got home, the bottom of my bag had let in some water. The top was okay for whatever reason. It was just the bottom that got soaked. So I don't know if you can see on camera there's some like the pages are a little bit not bent, but a little bit warped here from the water. They've dried up. There's a little bit of discoloration, which I'm guessing might be mold. And the pages stick together a little bit here. I don't know if you can hear them coming apart. But I think it's still perfectly readable. I don't know if I'm ever going to come across 2 pages that I can't pull apart, but it doesn't look like it. So yeah, this is me starting this book all over again. I guess maybe I could give some thoughts, as far as I can remember, on the first 180 pages my first time through. I found it quite readable. It's a grammar book, so it's a stretch to say it's interesting. I wouldn't say, oh, it was really interesting, because it's a grammar book. But what it was is readable, meaning I could read it, I could understand it, I was reasonably engaged with the prose, and I got this sense of satisfaction from having read something and understood something, especially stuff that's useful to me as an English teacher in my career, in my quest to understand all the grammar questions my students ask me, which was really not the case with these 2 books. So glad to be back reading something that's much more at my level. Yeah, like I said, there's some level of Chomskyan sentence trees. And I don't know if you can see this here. I think with this phone camera I'm using, this is going to show up in reverse in the rear image. But this is what I was talking about, the way that the auxiliary verbs here are hopping back on the sentence trees, which is something that they had talked about in the Linguistic Wars. And I was like, oh yeah, I remember reading that in the first few pages. There are exercises at the end. While I was doing this, I had a pen and paper with me, and I was doing all the exercises and checking them at the back. Some of the exercises were quite useful for consolidating my knowledge. Some of them felt like they were just going through the motions. It wasn't really helping me consolidate my knowledge, as it was just making me write a bunch of stuff, like writing out 3 different ways of expressing the same sentence with with the words or with the sentence trees or with the notation. But I've got a certain personality. If I'm going to read a book, I'm going to read it cover to cover and do everything in it, do all the exercises in it before I count it as a book that I've finished. Now this week, having picked up this book again, I read through, first of all, all the stuff at the beginning, which doesn't count in the page numbers. These are the Roman numerals. The acknowledgments, which I noted that Kathleen Graves, who's one of whose books on designing courses, syllabuses for language teachers, I've reviewed on this channel before. To the course instructor. So to the course instructor, actually, this book is apparently designed to be used as a pre-service book for teacher training. So, if you're studying ESL, EFL in college before you graduate and go out to the real world to teach it, this is addressed to the course instructor here. It's made me think a few times as I was reading this book. Again, the first 180 pages a year ago. Think to myself, I really wish I had taken a course like this before I began my English career and had read English teaching career. I had read something like this that so thoroughly breaks down the basics of grammar. And then the preface, new to the second edition. Talk about all the work they did in the second edition. And then chapter 1. In chapter 1, I've read up to page 7. So yeah, not a ton of reading this week. Chapter 1, the introduction, has some fairly basic stuff in there, although it's also interesting. It talks about how much of the English grammar we don't know. Let's see if I can find that quote. There's a quote in here somewhere. I don't remember exactly where that was. But basically it says there's a lot about English grammar that linguists still don't know and are still looking for. And they said we're going to talk about what we do know. We're going to point out what isn't known yet, and we're going to suggest further areas of research that maybe somebody could take on. Now, of course, this book was published. When was this book published? This is the second edition, but 1999. So who knows how much that's changed in the past 20 years. But that was also something that struck me while I was reading the Linguistic Wars, in which both Chomsky and his adversaries had so many grammatical problems or grammatical examples that they couldn't adequately explain with their theories. I remember, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I remember talking about this in the master's class I was taking at the University of Melbourne. And one of the professors was talking about the mystery of language acquisition, first language acquisition. And he said the really wonderful or amazing thing about first language acquisition is that a 5-year-old child intuitively knows all the rules to their grammar, but linguists can't even articulate what all those rules are. I mean, linguists are still doing all this research trying to figure out exactly what are all the rules that a 5-year-old child intuitively knows. This is something I've occasionally mentioned to other teachers in the staff room, because teachers in the staff room, maybe particularly new teachers, will sometimes express dismay at how they're not able to answer all their students' questions about grammar, or how they don't know all the rules of grammar. And I'll say to them, listen, linguists don't even know all the rules of grammar. Nobody knows all the rules of grammar of the English language. And so I thought that was interesting to find that reaffirmed here in these opening pages. And again, from my memory of the first 180 pages that I read a year ago, they do talk about some of the problematic parts of the grammar, even with something as simple as a subject-verb agreement, like is or are. There are some very clear cases, like the boy is, the boys are, but there are all these very murky cases, like collective nouns, or, talking about a pair of shoes, or all these other cases where it seems like there's not firm agreement on whether the singular verb or the plural verb should go with that. So those are things that will be coming up in chapters to come as I reread a lot of this. But those are things I remember somewhat vaguely from the last time I had a go at this. So this time, I'm going to try and stick with this book and not get distracted by other things, and come back and talk about this book more in the weeks to come. King Arthur and His Knights. This week I read from page 118 to page 178. I hate to say it, but I've had to admit to myself this week that I'm getting a little bit bored with this book. And I enjoyed the previous Howard Pyle book I read. Where is that? Looking for, it's somewhere around this room. The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood. I wanted to show that up as a visual, hold it up as a visual. But I don't know, I'm enjoying aspects of this, but I'm also finding it a little bit repetitive and predictable and just going on way too long. So in the parts I read this week, and this picks up from the part I read last week, it's King Arthur being in love with Guinevere. So Guinevere is this beautiful lady that he saw once before on his adventures, and he's in love with her. And she and her father are being threatened by another king and another duke who are demanding that she be handed over to them in marriage. Now, King Arthur goes into her garden to work as a gardener boy in disguise. And Merlin gives him like this cap. And when he puts on the cap, he looks like just an ugly gardener boy. And it's a little bit creepy, kind of why he's hanging around her garden in the first place. Actually, I say creepy. It would be creepy in real life. I should be careful though, because this is obviously meant to be a sort of fairy tale, and in these fairy tales, you just have to give these things a little bit of slack. You have to say, okay, this is just what was considered romantic in this genre of story. Although, what undermines that reading a little bit is how the author is always just harping on about how wonderful King Arthur was and what a great role model he was. Yeah, let's see. He's continually talking. I was seeing if I could find a good quote here, but it's maybe more something that's throughout the book. Oh, here it is. In the foreword, he said, "For when in pursuing this history, I have come to consider the high nobility of spirit that moved these excellent men to act as they did. I have felt that they have afforded such a perfect example of courage and humility that anyone might do exceedingly well to follow after their manner of behavior in such measure as he is able to do." So he starts that off as the introduction, but then all throughout the book, whenever he begins a new chapter or begins a new adventure, the author is always moralizing, say, okay, take good example from King Arthur of how you should always do your best or how you should always be brave. He's holding these characters up as moral paragons from which young boys can get their virtue. And in that sense, all this kind of weird fairy tale stuff is a little bit creepy. But not only that, it just is so predictable. And Guinevere knows that there's something going on. So she yanks the cap off of his head. First of all, she asks him to take the cap off. He refuses to do so. He says, "I've got an ugly spot on my head." She knows something's going on. So one day she just yanks it off. And she could see like the very beautiful and handsome young knight beneath it. And then she just laughed and gave him back his cap. But then after having that revelation, then she still continues to treat him as though he's a gardener boy, even though she knows that there's something more going on. Meanwhile, King Arthur, disguised as a gardener boy, goes out and gets a suit of armor and recruits 4 of his knights of the Round Table. Only they don't know it's King Arthur because he's still in disguise. So he has a joust with each of them, and he knocks them down, and as penalty, they have to be his servants. So he sends them to serve Queen Guinevere. And then the Duke, who's still outside the castle, is demanding that 7 knights come and challenge him and his 7 knights, or otherwise Guinevere has to be handed over in marriage to him. So Queen Guinevere has these 4 knights who are serving her, and she says, okay, you guys are going to go be my champions and save me from this bad Duke. Excuse me. And Sir Gawain says, no, we're not going to do it. We were told to serve you, to be your servants as our penance for losing the joust against that mystery knight. But we're still in service to King Arthur in terms of being knights at arms. So we can't go fight under your banner. So then when King Arthur hears this, and he's still disguised as a gardener boy, and oh yeah, by the way, he is acting. So as a gardener boy, he is under the head gardener, and the head gardener is like, why did you disappear for 4 days, or what's going on? And King Arthur is just being very forceful with the head gardener, and at one point threatens to beat the head gardener. And now, of course, the head gardener doesn't know that he's dealing with the king. And, again, if this was just some medieval fairy tale or something, I'd say, okay, well, fair enough. But because, again, the author is holding these people up as models of virtue that emulate constantly throughout the book, I'm thinking, okay, that's a little bit not virtuous. And then he sends a message to Guinevere, and he says, have those 4 knights actually be my servants. And Guinevere, who knows that the gardener boy is something more than he is proclaiming to be, says, okay, you 4 knights, Because you would not become my champions, as punishment, you have to serve the gardener boy. And this is like some sort of real humiliation from them. They have to be servants to the gardener boy. And they have to serve him food on a nice table. And they don't know that the gardener boy is really King Arthur. So Sir Gawain says to the rest of the knights, he says, okay, well, we have to do this, but as soon as our time of servitude is over, then we're going to kill this gardener boy in revenge. And again, I suspect this comes from the source material, but it doesn't really fit. Nobody is really acting virtuous in this book, despite the fact that the author is saying that there are such models of virtue. And again, I think maybe this is a problem with bringing these old stories into the modern world. But, you could bring these old stories into the modern world. You just don't talk up so much about how virtuous they were. I wonder if this was the thing around this period, because I remember reading Tales of Greece and Troy by Andrew Lang, a book I reviewed on this channel about half a year ago or so, which was also another retelling of old legends, around about the same time, around about 1900 or something, in which Andrew Lang was also talking about how virtuous Odysseus was, despite the fact that the source material he was drawing on was showing Odysseus doing all these things of questionable virtue. Because if you go back to those original stories, he wasn't always pure as we would consider it today. He was from a different time with different values, but even within that, he was supposed to be sort of a conniving trickster type character. And I think you could have Sir Gawain do something like that in a book like this if there was some sort of comeuppance, or, Sir Gawain's character arc was to realize that, no, it's wrong to kill gardener boys. You shouldn't kill people who humiliate you. But there's nothing like that. Sir Gawain gets his comeuppance because he realizes that this gardener boy was really King Arthur all the time. And then he's like, well, I'm sorry because I didn't realize you were King Arthur. But there's no realization of the fact that it would have been wrong to kill him even if he had been a gardener boy. So yeah, all that stuff. And then even after the evil Duke is defeated, and the battle scenes in this book, all of them are very repetitive. It's just knights jousting. So, they run at each other with spears, and, either the spear will break on the shield or it won't, and somebody will be thrown from their horse. Ordinarily, I would say, okay, you find it's a little bit silly, but you come for the great adventure of knights fighting knights. But I don't know, none of the fight scenes really seem to be all that interesting to me. And then it just goes on way too long, where King Arthur is meeting Guinevere's father, and it's revealed that the gardener boy was King Arthur all along. It's supposed to be this big, shocking moment, and Guinevere doesn't know what to make of it. Except Guinevere clearly knew that something was being... The gardener boy was not who he appeared to be that whole time. But it's one of those stories where she'll discover something, but then in the next chapter she'll kind of forget what she discovered, or that's the impression that you get. I've decided when it comes to these King Arthur stories, perhaps, that I think maybe there are two sides to these King Arthur stories. One is the story of King Arthur and his knights going out and doing glorious deeds and being very chivalrous and heroic and brave. And I think those stories get very boring very quickly. The other story is about all of the incest and betrayal at King Arthur's court, among the knights of his round table and all the infighting in them. The fact that King Arthur was seduced by his half-sister, and then the son that they bore with that marriage ended up being the one who would overthrow Arthur, and the fact that his nephews by this half-sister were betraying him, and the fact that Lancelot and Guinevere were going on about that affair, and the fact that then Lancelot killed one of Sir Gawaine's brothers, and then Sir Gawain and Lancelot had that big rivalry near the end. Just that whole, the end of the legend where everybody's turning on each other seems to be the part that's the most interesting or has the most drama. These knights going out on quests or doing brave and heroic deeds seems to me to be the most boring part of the King Arthur story. Now, granted, this is from the perspective of somebody who's not read extensively on this. This is really the second proper book I've read on it, other than The Once and Future King. Everything else comes from movies and Wikipedia and kind of browsing stuff. But they do get into that a little bit here in the second part, because the second part is a book of three worthies. And it talks about part one, the story of Merlin. And Merlin is betrayed by Vivian. So here we get into the betrayals here. Now, this is the story, if you're familiar with this legend, about how Merlin has this young female apprentice who betrays him and imprisons him. And in The Once and Future King, the name is not Vivian. It's N-I-M-U-E, pronounced Nimue or something. I was looking this up on Wikipedia, and you know, there's some confusion with the names, and of course there's so many different versions of the King Arthur story. Nimue was in some versions the Lady of the Lake. In some other versions, you know, the lady who gives King Arthur Excalibur, the sword. In different versions, she goes on to marry one of the Knights of the Round Table. I forget which one. But in other versions, she's the sorcerer who betrays Merlin. In this version, it's Vivian, spelled I-E-N, V-I-V-I-E-N, who here was one of the friends of Morgan Le Fay. And then Morgan Le Fay was really upset because her son didn't get favored to the Knight of the Round Table because King Arthur only had one spot left. And he gave it to somebody who was more worthy. And then Morgan Le Fay, is it Morgan Le Fay? How do they say it in this book? Or Morgana Le Fay, goes off to Avalon, which is described in this book is a floating island that she can kind of steer this island around the ocean. And I didn't actually remember how Avalon was portrayed in The Once and Future King. I kind of thought that Avalon was a magical island where King Arthur kind of had his home base. I don't remember Avalon being the place where the bad guys, Morgan Le Fay, had their home base. But Morgan Le Fay sends Vivian out now to betray Merlin and to try and trick Merlin into falling in love with her and get all Merlin's knowledge before she imprisons him up in The Once and Future King, and I believe in La Morte d'Arthur, Merlin gets imprisoned in a crystal cave. Here in this version, he gets similar, but he gets imprisoned in a magic castle. And then she has the magic castle disappear into mist. So presumably Merlin disappears and is dead now or no more. I think in the other version, he was trapped in the crystal cave, and the implication is someday when England needs him again or something like that, he might someday be able to emerge again from the crystal cave. I don't know. Like I said, I should be careful how much I ramble on about this, because I really don't know that much about the King Arthur legend. But anyways, I'll try and make some more progress on this book this week, and then come back and talk about it more next week. I've been talking for over 30 minutes now, so I think I'll stop the video here and just won't talk about the podcasts this particular week. So I'll see you next week.